Have you ever wondered what could excite people when participating in group activities? That excitement could be the result of something created within us called dopamine. Now, dopamine is a natural and addictive substance that can become an emotional booster and sometimes a hindrance. It can take many forms and influence people anywhere of all ethnicities, customs, and beliefs. Now, dopamine can have an effect on people at events that gather large crowds, such as music concerts, sporting events, religious revivals, and of course, political rallies. Now, at this point, you may be asking, what does dopamine have to do with social events and interactions? Please allow me to further explain. Welcome to 4C's One Family. After protests hit a high point during the 2020 elections in the United States, I began to question the information that described why and even how some citizens were persuaded to participate in certain events. And as expected, political and social pundits attempted to describe occurrences from their perspectives that weren't inclusive, making any point they raised sound unacceptable to those with opposing views. So I decided to look for a partial answer to my question. Hence, I started focusing on a relatively simple feeling we all can relate to and may have experienced. Most people are unaware of how dopamine can be triggered by events in their environment and overwhelm them without them even knowing it.
Wow!
It may be confusing and prevent some individuals from analyzing what they like, their relationships, and even what they need. This situation makes it difficult for some to compensate for their misjudgments, and they become, incapable of making critical decisions. Now, most of us relate dopamine to drugs and chemicals that affect how people uniquely function. However, there may be a relationship dopamine has with our life choices. In other words, what we choose to believe, congregate around, and above all, propagate and focus on. Now, let us take a look at how dopamine may be playing a role in aggression, passion, and overindulgence. I will try to explain why we must prevent our unregulated internal dopamine production from triggering our emotions and getting out of control. After becoming aware of the event that took place in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2020, I began to wonder how particular leaders were able to persuade so many people under their leadership to partake in this event at a location where elected representatives are supposed to implement and ensure policies that protect the well-being, democratic choices, and freedoms of the citizens they have sworn to represent. I wondered what could psychologically promote individuals to partake in an activity that caused property damage and the loss of lives. Research has shown that dopamine may be responsible for the emotional fueling of obsessions with money, power, and security. This comment may sound like it's coming out of thin air, but I will lay out some reasoning that explains why this may be more than just slightly true. Now, I will not take a deep dive into how dopamine chemically affects the brain's physical and psychological performance, because that would just take up too much time. Dopamine is just one of many neurotransmitters in our brain that are directly related to the sensation and regulation of pleasure. When dopamine becomes active in large amounts, it can make us feel good and motivates us to repeat a desired sensation. Dopamine production can be increased by consuming food that is calorie-enriched or stimulated by substances and activities that cause us to feel excited. These substances include alcohol, coffee, painkillers, recreational drugs, and activities like exercise, political rallies, religious revivals, music concerts, and others. Research has demonstrated that when a high level of dopamine contributes to an individual's obsession, whether because of an obligation or a particular need, the subject begins to focus exclusively on that obsession, which may cause them to neglect the things and people they should be paying more attention to. Once an individual achieves satisfaction, they begin to have a mental and sometimes physical dopamine crash, which causes them to have or develop a laissez-faire attitude about the results of their actions. And this turnaround could cause them to become even more aggressive or destructive when dopamine takes over them again. Now, over 2 years later, many who violently participated in the January 6th event are now being prosecuted for their action. They now face legal charges for their apparent disregard for life and government property, which could lead to other ramifications. Over time, some eventually appeared to display regrets and admitted that their actions were triggered by their need to protect a group they were loyal members of. Some realized that they were wrong and now have a better understanding of how they were persuaded or duped into participating in such an aggressive and dangerous endeavor. Their willingness to defend their group's concerns overcame them. Now, let me make this point absolutely clear. Individuals who participated in the now famed January 6th events weren't the only ones who engaged in similar risky activities and events. Those who engaged in what they would consider counter-protests also took part in activities ignited and fueled by their unregulated dopamine production. In this case and others, could it be possible that dopamine was one fuel that gave distinct groups the impetus to do what they did for their cause? Remember that influential and charismatic individuals who are sometimes narcissistic say and do things that are meant to become addictive to their audience by design. Being easily persuaded by popular influential individuals may lead to a cult of personality and exaggerated blind devotion. Individuals with a platform to persuade their followers or subscribers occasionally hyperbolically overextend their audience's concerns that happen to adhere to their own specific social political motives or goals.
Really?
Charismatic individuals and groups often use hyperbolic rhetoric to create a mob mentality to ignite dopamine fuses in those who prescribe to their particular beliefs. This propagation makes their followers hyper-reactive, which cause many of them to support and do things they regret later. Now, I am not trying to make excuses for those who participated in the January 6th event or counter-protests. Regardless of their actions, I'm just trying to understand why those who took part may have been motivated or triggered to do so. And I also want to point out how easy it is for others to inadvertently follow the same destructive path. I understand that some people who participated in events that resulted in the destruction of property and the loss of life may never atone and still feel that they did the right thing. I also understand that humans have a built-in tendency to be social, and being social contributes to happiness and longer lifespans. Social interactions enhance the overall well-being of personal health by fortifying our immune system and lowering cognitive degradation. However, when individuals become socially challenged or intellectually confused, they often look for a way to rationalize an opinion or decision, which is precisely when dopamine can excite an emotion or exaggerated response in these individuals. I hope I raised awareness of how something created in our bodies called dopamine could be ignited to motivate individuals and participate in destructive actions. It appears that humans are bred to compete, which may be why humanity has survived and some say advanced. However, sadly today, some of our advancements are being used to intimidate and harm one another. Dopamine's side effects on people in a society, especially when orchestrated by nefarious internal forces, can become destructive and irreversible. If we allow dopamine to amplify negative emotions and cloud critical thinking, we may find ourselves in a hole that is too deep to dig ourselves out of. If you have found what we have to offer of any value, please click on the subscribe and bell buttons below to keep up to date with our current episodes. And if you're listening to our podcast, please subscribe and help us spread the word that we have a lot more in common than we think. We're very interested to hear what you have to say. For 4C's One Family, I'm James Thomas in Taipei, Taiwan. And remember to stay strong, safe, and healthy wherever you are in the world.